Today on Eternal Conversations podcast, we have Rachel Williams, who is a blogger, writer, philosopher, interested in consciousness, feminism, bioethics, philosophy of psychology. She also happens to be transgender, and we'll be talking about transgender issues that are relevant in today's political climate. Um, so you look good. You look
Here.
good. I haven't seen you since your transition.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah,
I
def-
have been in Baton Rouge for what, 6 years now, I think?
yeah. It's been 6 years.
6 years, so it's been a while.
We uh we were graduate students together at LSU and in the philosophy program, and
Yeah, that's right. For,
that's
um,
how we met. And you were by far the most the most academic, the smartest, most the fiercest student. Like by far, I remember you published a paper in like a major journal. Um,
well, it's funny because that was the only paper I ever published under my own name. All the 6 years at WashU, I never published anything except, yeah, so I was very productive at LSU. That was a good time for me intellectually. Um,
yeah, I mean, you were by far like the smartest for sure academically. Like you could cite which page number, which paragraph, and of which chapter, and you try to dismantle and demolish David Chalmers in that paper. Of all
yeah,
people, like you were extremely ambitious.
Chalmers made me like very upset when I read him for some reason.
Yes, I knew you as a certain person, falsely representing, I guess, your male side. And at that time, um, I, I guess just to get by, still in the closet. But, um, but I got to know, we all got to know that side of you.
I don't think
And
that side of me still exists within me. Actually, I'm
cool.
still very. I still have that kind of competitive drive I once did. It's just kind of been sublimated into different channels. But I still have that same passion. It's just things are a little bit on the back burner right now because I'm just trying to get my financial situation situated now that I'm like dropped out of WashU because, just for the people who don't know, I was at WashU after when I was with Damon at LSU for 2 years. After that, I went to WashU for 6 years, but I ended up not completing the PhD program and I dropped out. And so now I'm just kind of like working. I'm a barista at Starbucks right now, and I
Wh-
just
wh-
started delivering pizza actually. So
Yeah,
I'm
back delivering pizza. I remember you said you started smoking, deliver pizza and stuff.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, I mean, it's not a horrible job. You make pretty good money, and it's easy.
why did you drop out, if you don't mind me asking, since you
Why did
mentioned?
I drop out? I mean, it's the main reason it boils down to is the job market for philosophy is really bad.
Yeah,
Um, I
but
mean,
that's the
that
reason why I decided not to pursue it either, because it's such a risk, you know. It's like
it's it's
um
brutal. I mean, there's people who have been on the job market for years and never had a single interview, and it's like, it's hyper competitive.
yeah.
You're constantly facing rejection. You send out hundreds of applications, which costs like all this money, all this time, all this effort, and you get just rejection after rejection.
Instead of just living your life.
Yeah, and the whole field of philosophy is based on rejection. You're just constantly getting criticized and rejected. You're to conferences, and everyone's just constantly showing you why you're wrong about everything. It's a very hypercritical field.
Yeah, I know
And the
what you
whole
mean.
publisher Paris mindset, like you have to be constantly like publishing, And furthermore, you're publishing in journals that no one reads. Like you're spending all this effort, all this time to like write papers and put them in journals that are locked behind these paywalls that only university academics can read. And even then, they're not even reading them. So you're spending all this effort. No one's reading your stuff. You're like wasting your time. Like
Yeah,
it just,
I know what you mean.
it just seems totally pointless to me. And plus, I don't like grading and all the bureaucratic and well, it's funny when I first started in college 10 years ago, I looked up at all my professors in my undergrad and I was like, this is like the dream life. Like they have the best life, like academia is so wonderful and it just seems like, but the longer I was in academia, the less I believed that it's just this awesome life. I don't know. I just became disillusioned about the whole field.
Yeah, I know. I have some of my reasons too. Like you don't have a choice in when and where you're going to wind up. Like say you get a PhD, you have to put out 1,000 applications around the world and just hope to get accepted somewhere, and wherever that is, whether it's Dodge, Idaho, or something like that. That's
And typically, unless you're coming from like a top 10 program, or unless you're just like an amazing publisher, you've already published like tons of papers. I didn't publish any papers in grad school, so like realistically, what would have happened is I would have like bounced from like postdoc to postdoc, or just like adjunct instructing, and would have been moving around to like one insecure position to another insecure position, just moving all the time, and I have no stability or security in my life. And it just didn't appeal to me.
so. Tell us your story. Like, so tell us. I am a caveman. I am in the situation. I am an idiot. I am ignorant of of transgender issues, but like a lot
Okay.
of people are. So, well, first of
Well,
all, I always think like, you know, why care? So for like, why call a once he a she? And some of my friends say, well, why should you do that? Why not? Why not let anybody be whoever they want to be, whatever they are to be?
well, I feel like the reason why it's not so simple as just being like, oh, let people be whatever they want to be is because the way we are taught to think about gender, there's kind of this like what you might call the naturalistic position, which is just kind of default position that most people grow up believing, and that's the idea that like gender and sex are immutable. They can't change. Like
Yeah,
that's kind of like the default position, and so with transgender identities, it's not just like, oh, you like ice cream and you like pizza, and it's just kind of a subjective thing. It's like it enters into metaphysical questions about what does it mean, like what is gender, what is sex, and so it's not just so simple to like answer these questions because it quickly gets into very deeper topics about like what is the nature of gender, and there's a lot that we don't necessarily fully understand, like how gender works. It's a very complicated phenomenon. There's a lot of facets to it, and I feel like on both sides of this issue, whether some people are out there who are skeptical of transgender identities, and then obviously, there are trans people themselves who are living their experience and like, have first-hand experience, with their own truth. Like they know their truth because they live their truth. Um, but I feel like on both sides of the issue, there's generally this tendency to simplify things and to kind of like not realize that gender is a very complicated phenomenon. It's a phenomenon
the human
that
brain, the human mind, consciousness is infinitely, complicated and simple and complicated. So
And for example, just to tie this back into like my own story,
yeah,
there's
yeah. Tell
there's
us your
this
story.
tendency in the media to sort of think about trans identities according to like the class what I call the classical narrative of trans identities. And here I'm talking specifically about trans women, but there's this narrative that you've always known since you were a young child. You just always known that you were trans. You were very feminine when you were a child. That you were only interested in men or boys, um, and that you were just a highly feminine uh, young boy who's always known they were trans. That's kind of the classical narrative. I didn't really fit into that narrative. Um, so that's one of the things that frustrates me about the media is they only kind of show certain stories in the media, and all those stories kind of fit a common pattern. But one of the things I've learned in my time, like getting to know trans people and like talking with trans people both like in person and on the internet, is that the trans population is incredibly diverse. Like, I mean, it's one of the most diverse groups of people you'll ever run into. Like, no one has the same story. Everyone's story is a little bit different. You know, like it's
Yeah, that's
some
cool.
people have known since they were 5 years old. Other people didn't figure it out till they're like 60 years old, and
Yeah,
um, everyone has different life histories, life experiences, different behaviors, different interests. I mean, there's not a whole lot kind of tying us all together. So
yeah,
that's one of my big takeaways is just the diversity in the community and how there's no single narrative, there's no single story.
yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. So some people knew since they were a child,
Yeah,
like they
and
were pretty sure.
when psychiatrists first started studying trans people back in the 1950s, 1960s, there's this one psychologist, his name was John Money, and he was very, very influential studying trans people. And he studied trans people and was the first person to really talk about this concept of gender identity. He was one of the people who coined the term gender identity as kind of like a psychological concept that became like well known. Obviously, people have had gender identities long before he coined the term, but he was one of the first people to actually coin the term and talk about this kind of stuff. And he hypothesized that gender identity was like language. Like there's a critical period in language, and we've heard these stories of like children who weren't taught language until after the critical period, and it kind of messed everything up. And so he thought there's a critical period for gender identity as well. And for most children, that gender identity gets locked into place by the time you're like 5 or 6 years old. And that's like the same gender identity you'll have for the rest of your life. Now,
Wow.
I personally do not think that gender identity is so um, locked into place like that. I feel like it's more dynamic, it's more fluid. Like for some people, it is locked into place, but that's not necessarily true for everybody. I feel like for us, some people, it's more fluid, it's more dynamic. It can change over time. It's not just this simple static thing for everybody.
So what is your story like? If you want to tell, like, when did you first figure out that you were a she, or you are a
Um,
she?
I didn't really. I mean, the thing is, like, I have been cross-dressing, like interested in expressing my feminine side since I was a young child. Like, either like right before puberty or like around puberty. So it's for most of my life, I've always been interested in expressing a feminine side, but it was always kept private. It was always I was always very secretive, I guess, because I kept it hidden from everybody. Because when I expressed that, I was punished either by my parents or by society. I was just kind of like socialized and taught that boys are not supposed to express themselves in a feminine way. It goes against a lot of Christian teachings and kind of like, that whole sort of like perspective of like, you know, God made you one way and men are like this and men act like this and they wear these things and women act like this and they wear these things and there's no overlap and there's no fluidity. There's no exploration. You just kind of like have these rigid gender roles reinforced, and that was the world I grew up in. And so I always kept it very hidden and behind closed doors. And that's how it was for years and years and years and years. And I was married, and I had, and she knew I cross dressed, but it like again, it was like very very secretive. It was always like behind closed doors. But then she divorced me or she left me, and all of a sudden I had this freedom to start exploring my gender. And I was about 28 years old at the time, or 27 or 28.
Do you
And
think that did she leave you for different reasons, or?
the story of us, like, uh, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but basically we had an open relationship. So she was seeing someone else. She was seeing a man, and she fell out of love with me and into love with him and left me for him.
Oh,
I don't think our relationship fell apart simply because of the gender thing, because the gender issue is never really, it hadn't really fully blossomed at that point. It was just kind of this kind of private side of myself that I would explore like in secret, but it wasn't like it wasn't the main contention behind our relationship. But she never encouraged me to explore that side of myself. She always kind of like, she never quite said so, but I could just tell with the way she would look at me, the way she would talk about it, is that she just did not like me um, doing that.
yeah.
So I was never encouraged. And we had actually talked about, like, we had watched this episode of some TV show, and there was like a trans woman in that show, and it kind of showed like her story in the TV show, a little bit of her backstory. And after we watched the episode, she turned to me and she asked me, she was like, "Are you ever going to want to transition?" And I like stopped and I thought about it for a second, and I said to her, I was like, "No, I'm never going to transition." But I like looking back on that moment, like why I answered like that. I think I just told her what I knew she wanted to hear, because I knew she was not supportive, and so I just told her what she wanted to hear, because at that time I was committed to the relationship, and I was just gonna do whatever it would be to like continue the relationship, and I didn't want to like, you know,
Yeah.
because she wouldn't have liked it if I transitioned. She would be very uncomfortable with that. She wouldn't
What
be attracted to me anymore because she's attracted to men. And
what does she think about it now, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't know. I honestly have no idea. Like,
Oh.
we split up like right around when I first started my transition, and I haven't seen her or talked to her since. So I have no idea.
Oh. You're not
We
friends you're not
we don't
friends
keep
on
in
like
touch at all.
on Facebook or anything like that anymore, or?
No, I haven't talked to her in like 3 years, something like that.
Oh.
Like 2, 3 years.
Maybe she'll see this podcast and one day and call you
Yeah,
up, you know? That would be awesome for you, you know?
yeah.
Uh, so, um, so continue on with your story.
Well, so my wife left, and it kind of like gave me this opportunity to start exploring my feminine side. And this just kind of like, it just kind of like grew, I guess. It became, the more I integrated that into like my daily life, the more it became, um, it just felt so right to start exploring that side of myself, that it became eventually less private and more something like that I couldn't hide. Could no longer hide it. I had to like express it, and I remember I came out on Facebook. I had some posts,
Yeah, I remember that.
I just kind and it just all kind of went from there. The rest is history. I mean, it just all happened very fast, but it was kind of and when I came out to my mom and stuff, she was skeptical at first. She says there's like no signs when I was a child. And that's the other misconception, is like sometimes like there are no signs because it's hidden. It's you don't see it, because expressions of it are punished. And so
The first time I ever met you, I remember it was me, you, and Scott and Jason at Subway. Um, and I just got into the master's program, and I don't know, someone invited me to Subway. And so, Jason or Scott, and so whenever I met you, I swear I remember seeing you as like you had long hair and you were kind of skinny and you had with really long hair, and I thought that you were super feminine. Like I thought that you were, your true animus is anima and animus. Your true
yeah,
animus was expressed like almost like an aura in that
yeah.
moment.
That's interesting because the thing is, like, even though there were like very like very little overt signs, for example, my mother was surprised. But when I reflect on my own history, kind of like, and I spend a lot of time kind of like introspecting and reflecting on the past, like searching through my past, like trying to find like little kind of like seeds or like hints or clues or something. And I do remember feeling that I liked that kind of that playing with that juxtaposition of femininity and masculinity. I had had that long hair for years and years and years. Like I had had that hair since like as long as I could like grow it out. I would have had it in high school, but my high school made me cut it short because it was a Christian academy. But as soon as I got out of high school and I was allowed to grow my hair out, I grew it out, and I don't know why exactly, but I was a metalhead, and metalheads, it's kind of the culture of metalheads to have long hair, but I think it was more than just that metalhead culture. It was like I enjoyed that kind of like that ambiguity, that playing with that.
But like a lot of geniuses are very balanced, like masculine and feminine, like Michael Jackson, say, or Prince, or 1980s like Guns N' Roses. Like the tight leather jeans and the long boots and the long hair, or a lot of like 80s musicians, rock and roll musicians, or like I'm trying to think of certain people, and shamans in indigenous cultures a lot of times
Yeah.
have
Um,
like makeup and earrings and beads, and they're sort of like the exact like man and woman like simultaneously. So androgynous to the bone, and androgyny, which is a different subject, but androgyny is always seems to be a major characteristic of extremely intelligent or genius people. But a lot of people don't see that. They don't even see that, like in the 1980s, the androgyny, or amongst the rock and roll, or amongst like Prince or Michael Jackson, or they don't. they don't recognize it, but they unconsciously identify with it, and they unconsciously um, uh, like it speaks to them in a safe way. Um, Led Zeppelin would be another one. Like, like a lot of, yeah, like back to the 60s too. A lot of um, androgyny is, which I know is a different subject, but is highly popularized, recognized, appreciated, understood.
Well,
Even,
even throughout, so there's just kind of like this reactionary attitude you see a lot of times on, either like the conservative side or the far right side or the anti-transgender side, and they say things like, "Oh, all this crazy transgender politics, all these new identities, this is like a new phenomenon. It's just coming out of nowhere." But trans people have existed for thousands of years.
yeah,
In cultures throughout history, they've always had social roles for people who have sort of like transgressed those gender boundaries, going from the masculine to the feminine and the feminine to the masculine and somewhere in between. And so for a good example is the Two-Spirit people in Native American society, and these are, like Two-Spirit is their own way of conceptualizing transgender identities, and and these people have generally been very revered in society. So trans people have not always been at this bottom of society, sort of like, but it was really when the Western colonial powers like swept through the indigenous peoples of the world and eradicated all those cultures, and they enforced their own rigid male-female binary on all these cultures who had like multiple gender systems to accommodate all the diversity in the gender role system. So it's really quite a shame that we've lost a lot of that. And now there's this kind of just assumption that, there's only two genders, when in reality, like gender uh, is one of those concepts that's heavily socially constructed, and different societies over time have had radically different gender systems, and the ones Americans are familiar with are that's just one way of looking at things. That's
it's
been
sort of
trying to.
like, I guess it's sort of like psychedelics, like have been used since the beginning of human history, and only in the last 50, 60 years since they've been, outlawed and by Nixon, then like that's not to be talked about anymore. That's so so taboo, not to be talked about, was swept under the rug, done in private, you know. But before, since the ancient Greeks, since the caveman eating mushrooms, like there's actually a very similar parallel between the two. Now that I think about it.
Um, I mean, for me, I feel like it comes down to I think there are a lot of powerful institutions that kind of like have made it difficult for humans to explore diverse like gender and sexualities. For example, like the Catholic Church. Like if you just look at like the stuff the Pope is saying right now about trans people, like he's talking about trans people as like being like equivalent to like nuclear bombs in society, who are like
What?
destroying the fabric of society because we threaten like the man or the God-given like order of gender, the men as the spiritual leaders and women, it's just this whole religious system, and like all these institutions and all these like Western colonialist like religious powers have just like kind of, I feel like, held back our species in so many ways.
I always say, like, why care? Like, if someone wants to be if someone is, and see, I'm probably making the mistake now that I'm thinking about it, of saying if someone wants to be a man, if someone wants to be a woman, if someone wants to be whatever, but it's not a want to be, it's
Yeah.
being who he or she already is, and
I mean,
just
the
be.
thing is, like, I do believe that for the most part, yeah, it's not about choice. It's about, who we are. But even if it was a choice, there's nothing wrong with making the choice. Like, if someone wants to just go on hormones just because, like, fuck it, they want to go on hormones, so long as they're not hurting anyone else,
Yeah.
then we should, at least from like a legal perspective, like, um, but the thing is, like,
Then
there's a lot of like concern about this issue from people, like with the whole bathroom things, for example. They're like, oh well, if we just allow people to just like randomly change their gender, whatever, then you're gonna have like all these like male predators like taking advantage of this and like sneaking into the women's bathroom and like abusing like women and girls or something. So you have all these like concerns like that you see propagated
what do
on
you
the
think about
conservative.
that, or what is your solution to it, or what do you think about that
Well,
problem?
first of all, I think we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, like, why do we have bathrooms that are segregated by sex in the first place? If you go over to Europe, most of the bathrooms in public settings in Europe are unisex.
Oh, that's a
Just
good
think,
point.
just think about like in our own homes. In your normal American home, do you have a female bathroom or a male bathroom? No, you just have a bathroom, and everyone goes into the bathroom, and no one freaks out. I mean, we have ways of dealing with unisex bathrooms. So I feel like we need to kind of ask bigger questions about like why the hell do we have everything separated into this rigid binary? Because there are a lot of people who don't fit cleanly into those two categories. Some people are born intersex. They are non-binary, or they're androgynous or intersex, or they don't cleanly identify with either side of the spectrum. Which bathroom are they supposed to use?
Yeah,
So you're taking 7 billion people on the planet who are incredibly diverse in their gender, their expression, their identity, their experiences, and you're basically trying to say, we're going to take these 7 billion people and we're going to neatly divide them into two and only two classes, and everyone's going to got to fit in one of these classes with no overlap, no exception, and that's how we're going to function all of our society. And that just makes no sense to me. Like,
yeah. It's
the
never dichotomous thought is always wrong. Like it's never this or that or and them. Like it's all and
yeah.
and nothing is clean cut, especially with human psychology. Um, and I mean, it's always people are all over the board from A to Z in every subject, every single belief, every single thought, every single spirituality, sense of spirituality, everything, all across the board from A to Z. We're not mechanical animals, and even other mammals have their own personalities too. I mean, anyone who's owned a cat or a dog, knows that just because two cats look exactly alike, they're both tabbies. This one has its own personality and likes to use, you know, everything from A to Z in the way that a cat can possibly like, think, believe, or feel. So imagine that, but imagine human beings who have the largest brains on the planet. Um, you know, psychologically, say, I guess a good example is psychologically, uh, there's a fetish for everything. I mean, everything under the sun. Like, I heard, I read a story from a book, Psychopathia Sexualis, but it was a man who used to see girls pass. He sat on a park bench and he used to see girls pass by and he would peel off his own skin and eat it. and they wondered why, and it was because he was fantasizing about eating their skin, but was not harmful. He was not a harmful man, so he peeled off his own skin and ate it. Or, I mean, pretty much anybody knows that there's fetishes for everything. There's necrophilia. There's, scat. There is, you know, used panties that sold on the internet. There's everything. So that is a good example, I guess, of how the human mind can be everywhere, and everybody likes different things and different paths. I'm just thinking out loud, just trying to like give some examples from my point of view, uh, uh, and that um, I guess it goes to show how spread out the human psyche is, and that people, they
It's
just
not
want
just
to.
the human psyche, it's not just the psyche and the mind, it's also just biology, it's evolution. I mean evolution as a organizing principle of biology is like based on the principle that there's going to be variation in the population. Like all populations of species have so much variation within the population, that's just normal. And so why should we expect that like human sex, that it's going to be so simplistic, because a lot of people want to point to like, oh, high school biology textbooks, there's like you're either XX chromosomes or your XY chromosome. We all know, real biologists who actually study this stuff know that there's like way more diversity in the biological spectrum than just XX and XY. There's like XXY and YYX and all these like, three X's, and there's so many different combinations and patterns. And they all give rise to different like phenotypes and different like behavioral profiles and like different like brains. And then you throw in the combination of like different like exposures to like hormones during like our when we're in our embryonic development. And then
Yeah,
you just
like
have
like
many different combinations and variations. And so
bro.
like sex as a biological phenomenon is not easily split up into like what either you're wholly male or you're wholly female. And especially if we think about like brains as having some kind of like gender, like a male brain versus a female brain. There's a recent like research paper that came out like last year that was basically these neuroscientists looking at all these thousands of brain scans of all these like men and women and everyone in between, and their conclusion was that every human brain, the normal human brain, is made up of all these different like combinations of male and female parts. So they're really, each of our brains is like a mosaic of male and female brain parts. And so very few people are like totally male or totally female in the way their brains are. And, trans people exist within that variation. So, but trans people typically have very different brains than, you know, like my brain is very different than the brain of your average person who is also assigned male. Because I was assigned male at birth, when when I came out of my mother's, um, womb, they looked at my body and they're like, this baby is male, and then all of society predicted based on that assignment that I'm going to go down a certain pathway, I'm going to like certain things, I'm going to do certain things, and like that prediction turned out to be wrong. Like that was not my destiny. Clearly I have moved beyond that prediction based on that original assignment. And I think the confusion is to think that we can predict someone's entire destiny, their entire life, based on whether or not they have like something that looks like a penis or something that looks like a vagina. Because there's just like so much more diversity in the species.
Did you are you keeping your penis or?
Um, well, that's a very personal question. That's a very private question.
Yeah.
So
I was just
I'm not
wondering.
super comfortable like talking about
That's cool. That's cool.
because that's like a very private medical question,
Yeah.
but like the honest answer is just I'm not sure. Yeah, um it's not a decision that I'm gonna make lightly.
But are you? But you're still into other women, though.
I'm into women. I do like women. I'm my sexuality is pretty fluid. Like I'm interested in all genders, but I tend to feel more comfortable with women as far as like relationships go.
Yeah.
But in terms of, like physical attractiveness, like I can find some men attractive. But yeah, I
Because
don't
that
know.
makes.
It that's kind of like been evolving and changing, and I feel like it's so hard to put labels on these things because so you're trying to label this complicated thing, and it's like trying to find the perfect label that's going to like totally encapsulate all your feelings.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I guess so that makes you a lot different because I guess because um, like some like dykes say who are born a woman but who identify as a man and who are like very manly but who like other women or some like you said there's so many across the board like it's infinite across the board or there's some who are born a man or and who transitioned into their true self into a woman and but then who like men but you
Yeah,
transit
and
but you
that is the classical narrative. So back in the
yeah
1960s, 70s, when psychiatrists were first sort of like starting to study this population of trans people, the common assumption was that all trans women were straight, meaning they were into men, and all trans men were into women, and they were straight. So they just assumed that all trans people were straight. So if you were assigned male at birth, and then you went on to transition to being a female, then you'll be interested in men and vice versa. But that's just not true. Like actually, the numbers, the data, because they've done research on this and they've actually studied this, and the actual data shows that it's about 30% of trans people are straight, 30% are gay, and 30% are bisexual. So it's quite a variation within the population.
yeah
Uh,
I didn't know that that's pretty cool um yeah so I came across this you saying that people trying to a lot of like Republican right wing conservative I mean type of thinking is they want to categorize people into this or that or us versus them and uh I really like this meme that I read don't like gay marriages don't get one don't like abortions don't get one don't like sex don't have it don't like drugs don't do them don't like porn don't watch it don't like alcohol don't drink it don't like your rights taken away don't take away someone else's
well,
you
I
know
think, I mean, obviously, I agree with that, but I feel like there's this tendency in American politics right now where we see the rise of what can only be called fascism, which is the idea of it's authoritarian. It's not just like, oh well, we're just gonna let gay people get married because it doesn't hurt us. It's like you're imposing your vision of how you think society should be run onto everyone else. I mean, that's
yeah
it's religious people have been doing this like since forever. The Christians who send out missionaries into the world, like trying to convince everyone else that they and only they have the truth. It's that basic mindset where humans seem very, it just seems very close to human nature to want to like impose
And
your
this is
view. Because if you truly believe that you're right, if you think you have the truth, then you're not gonna want to like um
this is the thing too.
let other people do it because you think it's wrong. It's like with the abortion debate example, like the fundamentalists who are against abortion, they think it's murder. Like they genuinely, sincerely think like it's murder, and like, would you just let murder like just oh yeah, it's if you like to murder, that's cool. You can just go off and murder. And I don't like to murder, but if you like to murder, no. Like if you actually think it's murder, you're gonna do whatever it takes to stop it. I mean, that's why it's a philosophical debate. It's a debate about the nature of what it means to be a person, what it means to be murdered. If you think embryos are capable of being murdered, then you're gonna have radically different views if you don't think an embryo is a person. So it's a debate about metaphysics, and so I feel like that's why all these sort of like debates, it's not just like live and let live. It's fundamental to people's moral systems.
Yeah.
And same thing with transgender identity. A lot of these conservatives, like they believe that God made gender one way, and trans people are kind of like upsetting that order. We're violating the kind of like will of God. And so
Well, I mean,
it's hard. It's hard for them to just accept it because it goes against their whole like religious worldview.
I guess that answers my question because I was about to say you know, who really cares? Like, why care so much? Because I'm sure that transgender population is very, the percentage is very small, in the bigger picture. And
It's like less than 1% of the population are
yeah,
trans.
so why, like, and even so, like, why would it even bother people? Or if you went to New Orleans, anyone who's been to New Orleans to the French Quarter, there are tons of drag queens. Like sometimes like big 7 foot tall, big bodybuilding black dude drag queens. And no one. It's like normal. In New Orleans, it's normal to see like drag queens say. And so what? It's like, yeah, no one bats an eye. But I guess if that same person, of course not, I guess, but if that same person was in, you know, Dodge, Idaho, somewhere, or grew up in like a redneck type city, then it would be a big deal. But like
Yeah.
the when and where, the set and setting, the when and where makes all the difference in the world. As if someone who is in New York City or New Orleans comes out or is
Well, the
just
other thing with like your example, like the drag queen in New Orleans and the French Quarter, that whole context, it kind of like it's the context of the freak, of the party animal, of the entertainment. Drag that's what drag queens are. They're just entertainment. They're just for fun. They're like a spectacle. They're not actually normal people just living their lives. Whereas like that's kind of what the battle for trans right is. It's the battle for normalization to take us out of like the kind of Jerry Springer freak show and to make us like normal members of society, like, and that's what I do at like Starbucks every day, or in my job. It's like I'm out there just like working my job, interacting with customers, living a normal life. And I feel like the more people like just know trans people as just like normal people who are just, we're just like everybody else. We're not anything special.
Oh,
And
that's a good distinction that you make,
yeah,
because
because
the
the
New
thing
Orleans
is,
drag
like,
queen is totally
progress on
different.
gay rights has only really taken off since more and more people like actually know a gay person. Like, 30 years ago, you might not know a gay person. Now everyone, oh, I have a gay friend. My uncle's gay. We know Ellen DeGeneres on TV. She's a nice lady and she's gay. So there's all this representation, and we know like gay people have become part of our personal networks. We know gay people. Um, but gay people are like 10% of the population. Trans people are less than 1% of the population. So most Americans do not know a trans person personally. And so it's really easy to kind of like other us, to kind of think of us as the other, has this kind of like metaphysically like strange category. We're just like, we're thought experiments, we're like,
Yeah.
or we're jokes, or, we're just kind of like this abstract idea, or we're, the boogeymen who are scary and are like, um,
I'm glad that there's protests. Like, I'm glad. So, so there's like a lot of movements going on, like a lot of progressive type movements going on, and I'm glad that. And even though people disagree with the the reasons for protests, for some of the protests, I'm glad to see that there are protests going on. There are civil revolutions. There are things are changing, and change is inevitable. And a lot of people, I think, a lot of people, they have a problem with change. Like, they want everything to be traditional, white Christian, Bible Belt, like traditional, and they like the Norman Rockwell type of thing, paintings. But um, but change is inevitable, and change, revolutions, is what leads to higher and higher states of society and consciousness, not
yeah.
staying the same.
I mean, my own perspective on activism and political movements, has really changed a lot since I started transitioning. Like, my whole political process, um, my whole political process has become much more radicalized. Like, I've become a much more radical political thinker, since I started transitioning. I think part of it for me is just that, I lost a lot of privilege when I transitioned. I went from being an incredibly privileged person in society. I was perceived by everyone to be a middle class, white, cis, straight, you know, elite academic who had all this education, and I was also married. I mean, I had like all this privilege in society, and then I gave up a lot of that privilege, to transition, and that has made me sort of like learn more and appreciate more like about solidarity with other people who, um, are repressed, by, um, all these like systems of inequality in our society, like racism and sexism and, all
Yeah,
these things. Like, I have a much better appreciation of that, and so it has made me a lot more politically conscious, more aware. I kind of went from someone who had political blinders on to someone who like now realizes what it's like to be like the target of like political movements. Like, 20 years ago, gay people were at the center of all these like social issues. Like, gay marriage would bring people out to the polls, and like, all the religious right, would like mobilize the voter base to come out and vote against like gay people like getting rights. But now trans people are that new sort of like conservative wedge issue. Like, There's been many cases where like fears over trans people have like brought up conservative voters to the polls, and the politicians know this, and they're using trans people as a political strategy to win elections because it's such a hot topic. It like galvanizes everyone on these extreme political ideologies, and
Yeah,
um, so I know what that's like now to be a target of that, and it's made me think about politics a lot differently.
I've actually experienced some racism in the last year or two because I'm a Cajun, but with dark skin and dark hair, and I was walking on my old campus, my undergraduate campus, and some a couple of times this happened, but some girl started freaking out. She was like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from here," and she was like, "Well, you look like a Middle Eastern man." Like I'm not used to seeing a man on campus who looks Middle Eastern. Like, are you sure? Like, like she was really seriously questioning me, and I'm like, I'm from here. What are you talking about? I'm a Creole. Like I'm a blend of like Spanish and German and Scottish and like I just but so and I can and people a few times have asked me where am I from and what am I doing here or looking at me in racist type ways lately. And it's starting to make me, I guess because there's so much Islamophobia, too going on, and I have been a target of that a few times. And even those very brief moments or conversations have made me feel like sort of, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, I don't know, like hurt my self esteem, kind of almost in a way, like walking around, like
Yeah,
worrying about people discriminating against me, something I've never experienced before. And that started to happen to me, people thinking that I'm Middle Eastern.
yeah. I mean, before I transitioned, whenever I like talked about like politics or identity politics or gender and racism, like all that stuff was very academic, it was very intellectual. It was all just like thought experiments. It was like an intellectual game. It was like who had the best arguments, who is the most clever. But now like a lot of this stuff like actually like impacts me. Like the Trump administration like is actually like impacting or potentially impacting like my actual life. And that feels a lot different than it ever did before. So a lot of this stuff just has such an impact. But the other thing that's not widely appreciated is it's exhausting. It's just like every day you wake up on the news and it's like one more thing, and it's just like it just wears you down, and like and that's coming from me. Like I still have a lot of privilege. I'm still white. I'm still highly educated. I still retain a lot of privilege now. People who are a lot less privileged than I do, like it's even more exhausting to live their realities, to wake up every day in a fucked up society that just like wants to kind of like crush you and prevent you from like flourishing. It's not easy. So,
Yeah. Um,
well, one of the things that I've really studied a lot since, I became interested in feminism is this idea of intersectional feminism. And feminism is basically like counterposed to the traditional mode of feminism, which was just like looking at women's issues exclusively from the role of gender. It's like how does being a woman or how does being a man like impact your privilege or your oppression in virtue of being a woman or a man or within this gender. But intersectional feminism looks at how all these other constructs of who we are and all of our different material conditions like influence our reality of in the society. For example, like what your economic status is. Are you poor? Are you rich? Are you black? Are you white? Are you disabled? Are you able-bodied? you know, what is like your life history, you know, all these different things like intersect to create our experience. So it's not, so like a black trans woman is living her life in virtue of like the intersection of being black, being trans, and being a woman, and all those things intersect in complex ways. And so it's never just a single issue that impacts your life. It's all these complex like structures in our society that impact things. So that's kind of the perspective I really try and think about. Is just looking at all the different factors that influence our lives.
Yeah. Um, so, what do you think about? I guess I'll ask some questions that other people are talking about. So, what do you think about being forced to call someone who has transitioned into a she or a he, like, must say she? Like, like I will force you to say she. I heard someone got arrested in California for calling someone who transitioned a he.
Well, I don't know about being arrested.
I have to look that up. I still have to fact check that. Like
That
someone
sounds
told me that. I was
sounds
like, I don't know about that.
like a myth to me.
Yeah,
But
probably.
the thing is, like, for me, it's not a question of like, oh, am I being forced or am I not being forced? For me, the question is like, are you an asshole
Yeah,
or are you not an
it's
asshole?
just a matter of respect. Like it seems like to me.
Exactly. You know, and a good analogy I like is, you know, someone gets married, they change their last name. Are you being forced to like use their new name? You know, like,
Yeah, yeah,
well, no, the question is not about forcing. It's like, are you a fucking asshole who's like not going to respect their identity? Or are you like what is the reason that you're so reluctant to use someone's pronouns?
yeah.
Because like
Just
the thing
why
is
not?
like
You
when
know?
a trans person gets the wrong pronouns, it's painful. It hurts. It's like a little knife like twisting in our gut. And so you're saying like, oh, I don't want to be forced to call that trans woman a she, but it's like you're basically saying that like your own prerogative to like have that freedom to misgender someone is more important than like the psychological pain that you're causing. You are hurting someone and then you're trying to justify hurting someone over some like abstract question of like your free speech or whatever. That's fucking bullshit. Like it comes down to if you're an asshole like or not. And if you're a good person, you're gonna like affirm people's identity and you don't want to hurt people and you want to lift people up and you want to like you know that's what it comes down to for me. Like and the other thing is like if you kind of get to know trans people, you will realize that the pronouns we choose for ourselves are appropriate. They just make sense. Like if you just get to know me, you'll realize that like calling me a man is just not appropriate based on who I am. People just don't get to know us very well. You know,
I'm
so
glad
the
you're
more
bringing this up. I'm really glad that you're bringing this up and out because so some people say, well, I'll refuse to call uh, her a she, um, doesn't realize that they're hurting that person. I bet they don't realize that it is like a knife in their gut. It is wrong to that person. Uh, and I'm sure that a lot of people don't realize that. So I'm glad that you bring that up.
yeah. Now the other thing is this is where it gets really complicated in this debate is because there's this whole concept of passing. You know, how well you pass as you identify as gender. So a trans woman who passes really, really well, you know, you can't really tell she's trans. She's very feminine, doesn't look or sound like a man. But not all trans people pass, and especially when we're first starting out our transitions, maybe we haven't been on hormones for very long, or you know, we're only just beginning our journeys. Sometimes it's harder to pass, and so a lot of cis people have this difficulty gendering people differently from how they look. So if it's like if someone looks like a man, they feel like they have to use those male pronouns because that's how their brains have been programmed. But it actually takes, you have to learn how to decouple people's presentation from their actual gender, because gender is different than like presentation. Like you can't just look at someone and like know what their gender is, because people are always in different stages of their transition. If someone like literally just started transitioning yesterday, they're probably not going to look like their gender. They're not going to sound like their gender. You know, they're not on the right hormones. They haven't had time to learn to be who they are. And so a lot of people are so quick to judge people based on like what they look like, but that's just not how gender works. Like gender is like, it's like consciousness, it's like pain. You can't see it, you can't observe it, you can't build some like machine that's going to detect it. It's a subjective, psychological, hidden process.
I like to always say that you can't tell how intelligent someone is by the way that they talk. You know, by their accent. Like me, I sound like an idiot. You know, but give me a pen and a paper, and I'll write something that you've never read before. You know, I can blow you away with my poetry or with my essays or my philosophical writings. But if you talk to me, you would never know. You know, because the way that I talk, or some people talk like this, or some
Yeah.
some people talk like this. You know, you can't. They may be the most intelligent person you've ever met, but so many people judge people by the way that they talk. Well, he's not clear and articulate enough. You know, using big words helps, but most of the time, like 99% of the time, unless you're in academia, you're not going to be using GRE words. You know. And if you do throw an occasional GRE word out there, like in the normal public, people are like just blown away, like whoa.
Yeah.
So I guess like not being able to tell how intelligent someone is based on the way that they talk or their accent would I guess I'm just trying to make a similar analogy to understand.
Yeah. Hey Damon, I just looked at the time and this has been really great, but I gotta work tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
I
I didn't
think I
know.
think we've been chatting for what, an hour? Over an hour?
Yeah, I thought it was gonna go like 2 hours or something. Yeah.
No, sorry. I gotta I gotta get to bed. I gotta get up early tomorrow for work.
Well, how about 10 more minutes?
Okay, yeah, we can talk
And
for a
I
little
can
while.
ask you. Um, so, what are your thoughts on spirituality? Well,
Uh,
I want to talk to the philosophical you that I know and that you still are. And so I want to have some philosophical conversations. Like, what are your thoughts on spirituality?
well, typically I think when people say like, "Oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual," I don't typically get a firm grasp of what they mean right away by that, because it means so many different things to so many people. Um, for me personally, I'm sorry, I'm kind of like losing my voice a little bit.
That's yeah.
Um, when I think about my own spirituality and my own spiritual path, like I always come back to Buddhism, to Zen Buddhism in particular, because that's always been the spiritual path that has attracted me the most, is that kind of like meditative path, the path of like
Yeah, me too.
seeking enlightenment through the here and now, and through processes that are immediate to our own psychological reality, rather than like seeking enlightenment in processes that are supernatural, that are like beyond the human world. Because Zen Buddhism in its like purest state, in my understanding, It doesn't require belief in gods or deities or higher spiritual existences. It's all about just meditation, which is
You,
like,
your mind is your God.
and meditation is a secular process. It will allow you to tap into experiences that might be radically different from what you're used to, but you never have to invoke like a higher spiritual reality to explain it, because because the whole attempt to even explain your experiences is against Buddhism. Like, Buddhism is not about like explaining your experience or trying to like form a theory about it. It's just about living it, about experiencing it. Um, but with all that said, even though like the meditational pathway is like my own preferred spirituality, I haven't formally practiced meditation in years and years and years and years. But I used to, and I did have a practice for like a long time, and I still have kind of continued on with that, with all those skills. I still use those skills, like, when I'm falling asleep, or I'm stuck in a traffic jam, or I just need to relax and calm myself, or I'm under stress. I can just kind of like use those skills I learned, how to breathe properly, how to just like relax myself, to like, not let my thoughts get the best of me, to not let my monkey mind kind of go crazy. So
Yeah.
I can use all those skills to like, help me live my life better. So I still feel like even though I'm not following a spiritual path like directly, I still feel like I have one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Like some sort of, uh, yeah.
But it's more like it's just become automatic to me. It's not something I sit down and formally put time and energy into, but it just kind of nevertheless has impacted my daily life. Um, uh,
So, what is the meaning of life, according to you?
um, I don't feel like there is a meaning to life. I feel like deep down, I'm a nihilist, so I feel like all value, all meaning is just something our minds project upon a meaningless, valueless universe. You know, my belief fundamentally is that all that exists are atoms. They're just atoms out there in the void. Atoms inherent to themselves have no meaning, have no value, and all value is just a product of biological creatures projecting value upon a meaningless universe. And different creatures will project different values, and there's no ultimate way to determine whose values are the right values or which meaning is the most meaningful. It's all just subjective. And
Yeah, after 15 years of philosophical study, after I got my master's at the program, and I was kind of tired of philosophy, and I said, you know what? I think really it is what it is. I am who I am, and it is what it is. And I
yeah,
was
I mean,
like,
and this,
I am who
and
I am, like, and it is what it is. That's it, you know?
and it just so happens that the human mind is programmed. We're programmed to be nice to each other. The reason why, like, even though I think nihilism is true, I still believe in morality, partly because the value of like human life, or the value of like socializing or community, or building each other up, valuing happiness in other people, that's just how we're programmed, because of we're a social species.
Yeah.
And so I don't really worry about like, you know not having meaning, because I know that millions of years of evolution has programmed me to project meaning onto the world. I can't help it. um,
Yeah.
so it's
It's
like,
fun. It's fun to try to do, but and
yeah, because we all live in a life world. Like, this is something Heidegger talked about, is we live in a world of meaning and value, and everything has a usefulness to us, and that usefulness that we perceive in the world like stems from our internal like value structure, and our values are derived from our desires. Like, what is it we want? Like, we're hungry, so when we see pizza, we see value in the pizza. And what do we want? Well, we want sociality, we want connection, we want human connection, and so we project that meaning into our relationships, and we derive meaning from being parents, friends, lovers, wives, husbands. So and it's funny, when I started transition, I really kind of like my own value structure changed a lot. I went from someone who put a lot of value on my career and like this kind of like path to be this like intellectual, like academic professor who's gonna like be the best professor, blah blah blah, and had this really awesome career. And I started valuing a lot more like my relationships, you know, trying to find like happiness in my day-to-day life. So my whole value system changed a lot since I started transition. Um,
Um,
and it's one of the reasons why I dropped out of my PhD program, is because I just didn't place as much of an emphasis on having this like big hotshot career anymore. Um,
yeah. Oh, so you said that people, when they first start taking hormones, like people can't tell, that they're transitioning into who they are yet. But how have hormones, how has that been for you?
it's been good. I mean, like they have changed my body significantly in many ways.
Mentally, though, too, maybe? Because
Um,
because I
I
know I've taken testosterone before in the past, and that's, you know, there was obvious and a clear difference in mind, like caveman, like fuck, eat, work out. That's it,
Yeah.
pretty thing. And like all of my sensitivity and all of my uh, uh, even intellectualness and sensitivity was like out the window. It was like hard for me to think. And I'm just wondering if it had any sort of mental effects, as physical
I
effects.
mean, I have no doubt that it has changed my mental life significantly. One of the best examples is through my emotions. So, estrogen has changed like my own relationship with my own emotions. I cry more now. I process my emotions through different processes. Like, when I watch a sad movie, like I get a lot more emotional. When I like am dealing with things in relationships, I'm more emotional. So,
So you're more so you're more sensitive and caring.
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely more sensitive. But I think also for me, it's hard to totally separate like the social aspect to from the purely biological, like hormonal, because a lot of it is like I like learned to be more emotional because it's now accepted for me to be emotional. Whereas when I was like, living in this male gender role, like society did not encourage me to explore my emotions, to process things. Like, men are supposed to be like cold and rational and stoic, and they're not supposed to like show emotion or process emotion. And if they are, they're not real men or whatever.
So you're not really sure where it's coming from because men do cry at movies. Like The Notebook or something.
Yeah.
I almost shed it. I shed a tear for the end of The Notebook. When they died together and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so I know.
So, so yeah, I feel like it's a mixture of both. It's not just the hormones themselves. It's also the social, but it's a little bit of both. But this kind of comes back to the whole nature nurture debate. Why are women different from men? Is it because the hormones, because of the DNA, or is it because of our social histories, our environments, or our societies, or our culture, or our language? Like, it's everything. It's you know, it's never gonna be like this or that. It's never gonna be so clean cut. Like, it's always a very complex interaction between all these factors. So I have no doubt that the hormones have like changed my mind, like in an actual neurobiological sense. But also like my learning processes are different now. I've 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 learned a lot. My social experiences are different. Um, my behavior and my mannerisms are different because I'm like looking at different role models and who I'm like modeling my behavior after, like who I pay attention to as far as like who I want to be like and who I want to act like. And so there's a lot of like complex learning processes happening in addition to just the the biological stuff, and also it's this feeling of like allowing myself to express things that have always been there. They've just been deeply repressed, and so it's a fine line between like letting something develop within yourself that you've been repressing versus something just coming out of nowhere. Because how do we really know like how far deep down does it have to be repressed to where it like doesn't even exist anymore? And how do you like figure out like what is truly in your unconscious? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I guess you're more free to explore your unconscious because it's you're experiencing the other side of the coin to the furthest degree. So you've been on both sides. So you're
yeah,
gonna have like the full spectrum, the full gamut of learning experiences. As both.
yeah.
As
A lot of trans people, you know, they focus on the negatives surrounding transition, and there are a lot of negatives. It's not easy being trans for a lot of trans people. But for my mind, I also like to think of the positives sometimes too. And one of the positives for me is that like I do have that dual experience. I've lived in both gender roles. I have psychological insight into the mind of like both sides of the gender spectrum. And for me, that I just feel like lucky that I have that insight. Because so many people are totally like locked into this one way of thinking, and they just have no appreciation that there's like freaking half the planet who thinks in a totally different way from you, and they just can't. It's this classic thing in society, like men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and they have like there's this kind of like assumption in our society that women or men are radically different, and
yeah, yeah.
whereas like in my experience there's less difference. Like I feel like men and women are more similar than they are different, even though the differences that do exist are pretty big differences. So there's similarity and there's difference at the same time. um,
I always thought, and maybe I'm wrong, but I remember I concluded that the main difference between men and women, and the main only difference, was that women could get pregnant, and men typically have stronger muscles, and that everything else follows from that.
it's not even stronger muscles, that they're just bigger.
Yeah,
Because their muscles aren't stronger, they just have more muscle.
or
They
bigger
have
muscles.
they have a larger frame.
Like women get pregnant, and men have typically have bigger muscles, and like everything else follows from that. But mentally, but I guess I'm wrong, But intellectually, um, academically, there's no difference between men and women for sure. You
Yeah.
know.
I mean, this is a topic that the difference between men and women, like what's natural, what's social, what's constructed, what's real. It's an endless debate, and we'll never figure it out. Because the only way to actually answer this is to do a controlled experiment where we like raise babies from birth in a super tightly controlled environment where we can hold everything constant. But we'll never be able to do that, so we'll never be able to answer these questions.
But but you've experienced both sides, so you
Yeah.
know that there
You know,
are.
I do have greater insight into this difference, but we'll still never know for sure. Um, because what is I don't know, the rabbit hole just gets deeper and deeper the more you think about it.
Yeah.
And people drive themselves crazy if they're worrying about this sort of stuff. I kind of just like take a more agnostic perspective at the end of the day, just for my own sanity, because if I try to sit here and endlessly theorize about gender, the origins of gender and where gender comes from and blah blah blah, you just get like so lost in it.
So I guess like so you're not. So once again, you're not. You don't really care that much about getting going down those rabbit holes because you're just being who you are. You know,
Yeah,
you're just being yourself. What's the
I
point
mean,
of
in some of my
theorizing so
writings,
much?
I've expressed this in terms of like, I don't care so much about my identity, but I know my desires. I know how I desire to present myself. I know how I desire to live. I know what hormones I desire to have in my body. I know what pronouns I desire to use for myself. I know what name I desire, but so I know all my desires, but I'm less confident about my identity because for me, identity it's about labels. It's about creating maps, but maps are different from the reality. And for me, the reality is my desires. I know what my desires are, but I care less about the words and the labels and the concepts because yeah, because they're just kind of arbitrary. You can always define them differently.
And can you summarize your philosophy in maybe like a sentence or a paragraph?
My philosophy.
Can you summarize your entire philosophy in like a sentence or a paragraph?
All that exists are atoms in the void. Consciousness does not exist. It's a figment of the narratives we spin in our heads. Language is what creates thought. There is no God. We're all going to die. We have to create whatever meaning we want to. Um, and I think that's it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that sounds kind of pessimistic. Like a lot of people hear that and they think that's just such a dark, pessimistic like vision of the world. But for me, that actually gives me hope. It gives me like if there is no meaning except the meaning that I'm creating, then that just
Yeah.
gives me all the more reason um, to focus on making this life the best I can. If there is no heaven, if there's no afterlife, if when I die, like my consciousness gets erased forever, then I have to focus on living my life to its fullest. So I need to focus
Definitely.
on making myself happy today. I can't put off my happiness 10 years 10 years down the road when I finally get a good job, or I finally make more money. I have to work on finding happiness like right here, like right now, today. Because otherwise, I'm going to wake up when I'm like 50 years old and I'm going to realize that I've wasted my life and I spent my whole life like working and, slaving away, like, not even being happy in the whole process. And like, for what? Like, why did I go through all that school, go through all that work? Like, was it be happy or was it, for some
Yeah.
other reason? So it's just, for me, it's all about like getting priorities in my values and like realizing that like I need to value, find a balance between like planning for the future and living in my existence today. I think that's for me, it would sum it up.
That's awesome. That's super awesome. That's what I think too. Like I always think you should live as though you're already an old person looking back on your life. You know,
Yeah.
like you're already
No.
old looking back in your life, and not you, like you said, not waking up, being 60 years old, thinking, "Oh shit!" Like wait a minute, I really
For sure.
wanted to be this or that, or I really wanted to do this or that, or I really wanted to, and I didn't do any of those things because all I did was be what other people wanted me to be, and how act the way that people wanted me to act, and work in ways that people wanted me to work. And then now look at me, I've or and talking about living in the present too. I think I'm trying to graduate to the aconceptual. So I spent so many years in concepts and theories that, and I'm not in that world anymore. It's been a while. It's been 6 years, for me. Like I'm not in that world anymore. And I'm trying to graduate to the aconceptual, uh, because living in a world of theory and concepts is always living in a world, always living in a future tense. It seems like, and it's like, man, life is short. Just it really is. Uh, Especially relatively in the geological time scale, the history of humanity, the geological time scale, all that. Life is short. We're nothing but like Alan Watts said, just a blip of consciousness. Just like a blip. In the bigger scheme. And so, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, for sure.
How are you going to make yourself happy and make others happy too? Like to say that, how are you going to make yourself happy? Always sounds selfish, but what it's like. But how are you going to make others happy? Like me happy, you happy, all of us happy, so we can all be happy together. And allowing everyone to be ourselves and to be have all of our rights and reasons to think how we want, to act how we want. Uh, what's wrong with that? That's awesome. That should be the highest state of civilization and consciousness. And I guess some are, you know, it's a long, slow road, But I'm wondering, hoping in 1,000 years from now, looking back on this time, people will say, man, look at those people, look at those cave people. They had guns and they would shoot each other for just having different beliefs, and they drove around these metal boxes and ran into each other and killed each other and you know you know drew lines in the sand and said, don't cross that line or I'll kill you, or don't even think a different way than I think, or I'll kill you, literally, like, it's got to be the case that 1,000 years from now, if we are around, that they'll look back and say, man, so we are trying to, people like us are trying to philosophically, psychologically, like bring, get a little closer to raising consciousness and awareness and civilization to levels that it's actually been to in the past with Greece and Rome. We are, America, the United States is an empire, just the same as Greece and Rome once was. We really are. And, you know, we're either going to crumble or possibly, or we're going to instead go into a higher levels of consciousness. And I think that these revolutions, uh, like the Black Rights Matter and the transgender topics, and the uh, all these different Antifa and all these different like revolutionary um, moves are hopefully going to raise awareness. And so I even think that the whole Trump Jeff Sessions thing, I'm like, I'm kind of like on the fence of fate versus circumstance. It's kind of like convenient to think that there's a meaning to life. Like sometimes I just kind of give up. Sometimes I just kind of, but then again, sometimes maybe there is, if all is one, like if all is one organism and there is no God, because all is God. If this is a pantheistic type universe and it's all and we're all in this like one organism, like this all like the whole universe or multiverses and us being a part of it is if it's all this one organism, then then maybe there is some sort of meaning, um, but and then maybe there's not.
But in the meantime, we just have to live our lives and try and make ourselves happy and our friends and family and loved ones
Yeah.
and support our communities, our neighborhoods, our local, organizations. So,
Oh yeah. So I thought about the Trump and Sessions thing. I said, well, and it's so like I thought that the race relations and the relations between different cultures and different groups of people was going in a very positive direction because of like the internet and YouTube and it used to be at one point. I know you have to go, so I'm trying to wrap it up real quick. Uh, but like there it seemed like in the 80s, say there was people who only listened to punk rock, only listened to country music, only listened to rap. And then whenever multimedia became more and more prevalent, um, and I grew up listening to rock, rap, alternative, whatever, like whatever sounded good. Like if the song was good, that's it. That's the only thing that mattered. And now, instead with the internet, people being able to access, any music from around the world in any language and experience all cultures, globalization from the internet was, I think, in like the last 15 years, was going in a more positive direction. And then the Trump and Sessions came, like Sessions wanting to go. It seemed like that whole regime was wanting to set everything back to like the 50s. Like literally the 50s.
yeah. Well,
On
it's
all
two steps forward, one step backward. Right now, we're taking a step backwards, but
yeah.
like,
So it's like, what? Why universe? Why is this happening? This Trump and Sessions, and I thought the only thing that it could, I like to turn lemonade out of lemons, and I like to try to always do that. And I said, well, maybe because after this regime, like people will go twice as far into the direction of higher consciousness.
yeah.
Like you said, one step forward. I mean, one step back, two steps forward. And
Yeah. Well, okay, David, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on.
yeah, I know. Finally, we've been talking about it, and
Yeah, so I'm glad it finally happened. So this has been great. So, uh,
yeah.
all right.
Uh,
Well, you
check
take
out.
care, and I'm sure I'll be back on sometime later if you want me to continue the conversation.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Did we
but
we only touched on like a couple of things out of a list, so there's always we've always had great conversations, and
yeah, for sure.
check out
Well,
eternalconversations.com and the Eternal Conversations podcast. And peace, love, and light.
all right. Bye.
All right, peace.